Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Kodiak Shack podcast. We're going to keep that conversation rolling. But we've got Adam Chitwood back. He's finally retired. Congratulations. If I had like a crowd cheering in the background, I would put that audio on now. But this is a Mickey Mouse organization at best. But yeah, he's back. He's going to talk about some cool stuff that he kind of posted on LinkedIn, which kind of got a lot of conversations going because it's definitely interesting what's happening out there. He was at the Agile Battle Lab, B1 pilot, and a lot of experience. But I'll let him do his intro. But remember, like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends about the podcast. Follow us on LinkedIn, which is what we're going to be talking about today with Adam, and then also Instagram. We don't have a Facebook page, but you know, all the stuff. So and donations are always open. Thank you everybody who has donated to the podcast, keeping us going and helping us produce this show. So thank you, Adam. Thanks for being back, and go ahead and retell us about yourself. Still not a trap.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yeah.
T6 FAPE turned B1 pilot, turned weapons officer. Did a short stint at the State Department working Ukraine and some other pieces there before I went out to do staff at PACOM, turned Indo-PACOM, held about 3 or 4 different positions there for senior leadership. And then from there, joined the organization called Squadron Next, and then quickly transitioned it to Air Combat Command as the Agile Battle Lab. So multiple pivots, multiple rebrandings over 3 years, pivoting to what the customer needed as our customers changed, as leadership, needs change and stuff like that. And kind of where I think the impetus for this came from was some pieces when I was at the State Department in Georgetown, as well as in the Agile Battle Lab, understanding the tech and how it can be used and all the different implications of new technology as well as old technology, and how to come up with better ways of doing things once you understand it, once you've seen it in action, as opposed to what we are also used to, which is just evolve your ideas on PowerPoint. And kind of what the LinkedIn post got at was, once you understand the capabilities of the technology and you understand where technology is going, the ways in which the Air Force, owns the air domain does not need to be limited by our legacy operational concepts. So think back to, you guys both flew the Viper. Vader, you're flying the Eagle now, Bender to the F-35. That all dates back decades, at a minimum, to our plans in the 70s and 80s to update the Air Force, but maybe back to World War II and before that to the fighter, owning the skies type of thing. And my concern over the last, call it, few months was the way the Air Force talks about collaborative combat aircraft is merely an evolution of that old way of dominating the skies, and the tech has moved on from that to a point at which I think doing CCAs is like putting armor on a horse for the horse-drawn cavalry, pre-World War II. Like, no, you need a tank. You don't need, steel plates on a horse type of thing. And when you think through manufacturing, sustainment, multi-domain operations, multitude of sensors, that the ubiquity and the cheap amount of ways in which you can, buy precision in arms and in platforms, the two things that we used to keep separate, munitions and platforms, are two very different things. You can start to merge those and merge the rate at which you want to acquire them, merge your level of attrition, in which you consider allowable. Sometimes we in the Air Force call it acceptable level of risk, and the ways in which we integrate and fight the fight that we're all kind of leaning towards, which is think China, Western Pacific, Taiwan, South China Sea, all that kind of stuff. Adding some unmanned fighters to operate the exact same way that we always have I think that's going down the wrong path. And one thing that I think puts these concepts ahead of CCA is when you're out in the field and you understand the technology and you meet the programmers and you see how fast this technology moves, I consider it to be superior to, like I said, that PowerPoint evolution of what if we go from a manned fighter to an unmanned fighter? That makes sense on PowerPoint, but that's not the most, I think, effective use of our resources, manpower, and the way in which the Air Force dominates the air domain.
Well, and I mean, you had so many great points there, and I think it's so difficult. And this is kind of my argument where we can't just use military members to innovate and make change, because again, military members are not paid to come up with, like, think up these ideas and be, some sort of like ideas man at Google or anything like that. Like, we all have missions, we all have objectives, and we all know how we achieve the task today. So the way we think about achieving the task tomorrow is just a better widget than the widget we have now. And then all of our future widgets, like, just are rhyme with everything we have today. And it's
new tech for an old mission. I need a stealthy F-16. How about an F-35?
Yeah.
I need a stealthy F-15. How about an F-22? I need a better AWACS. How about an E-7? It's all just newer, more expensive versions of old answers that date back to, like I said, the 70s and 80s at a minimum.
Well, and that's the tough part, is because you don't even realize that technology has gone so far that it's not even the same. Like, the same hammer isn't going to fix it. It may not even be a hammer anymore. Like, your solution may be something so wildly different that you could never even understand how you're going to get that nail. It's like having screws now, and you're like, oh, sweet, I no longer need a hammer.
In 2017, I was taking Hacking for Defense at Georgetown, and we were working on counter small UAS was the problem set with the Army's asymmetric warfare group. And I was part of that group. And I attacked it as a B1 weapons officer, and here's kind of what I know about the technology. Here's why certain kinetics can and can't work, and blah, blah, blah. Fast forward a few months, and my teammates, who were young, didn't have a defense background. One guy was in the oil and gas industry. Another teammate was in public affairs, essentially. And they came up with, how about we use drones to fight drones? Like run a drone into a drone type of stuff. And they quickly took the technological lead, and I was calling it the military expertise, but they knew what was going on a lot more with tech than I did. And we came up with, hey, here's the answer. There was no money to be put behind that, so that was kind of a shortcoming back then in 2017 of the H4D program, and I think that's evolved. But fast forward then to 2019, I'm out in the field, and I see the Anvil, fly a drone into another drone. I'm like, great, that was the answer. We had the answer. It was internal to the government, and now we're going to just buy this, pay through the nose, relatively, more expensive than paying, government IP, but way cheaper than probably paying for, the IP if it came from one of the big five, defense contractors and stuff like that. But Andrew came up with the answer because they had money and they were creative. And you mentioned, it's not just military. One of the best things we had going for us at the Agile Battle Lab, and I think that it still continues today, and I'm a big believer, is the cross-functional, cross-background expertise of everyone there. I was the only pilot. There was Intel, Space, ABM, SEER, and kind of the list goes on. And it wasn't just one person. And as we talked to the comm people, the cyber people, the technologists, private industry, everyone brought a little bit of special sauce. And, the companies don't know how to fight wars, but they've got something cool. And they would bring a toy, and they propose it to us, or we'd go looking for a toy. We say, that's pretty cool, but if we tweak these one or two things and we did it like this, we could do something pretty awesome. We didn't, completely understand the technology. Definitely, we didn't invent it, but they didn't know how to, go to the front lines and understand the fog and friction of war either. And that applies not just to the Silicon Valley startups, but I would say across the board, even if people who have been on the government paycheck for a long time don't, understand the intricacies of the war fight. So that cross-functional background, I think, is the best way. If you ask a fighter squadron how to solve a problem, Eagles are going to solve it one way, and everyone in the squadron is like, yeah, that's the way. And, F-35 guys are going to say, no, this is the way. But you're all going to be homogenous within your own organization. But when you start cross-pollinating a lot of different backgrounds, you're going to understand that there's a lot of different ways to attack the problem set. And I say that, bringing the conversation back to CCAs, my concern is if I build a fighter-sized aircraft, it's going to have the same physics of a fighter. And not just for launching missiles, but in terms of the cost of procuring it, the cost of sustaining it, the amount of runway it needs, the amount of fuel it needs, the amount of tankers it needs. And there's even, some Air Force leaders were talking about allocating those CCAs to a fighter squadron. Well, when a fighter squadron deploys, you might not deploy parts of your fighter squadron 500 miles closer or further from the fight than the other part of your fighter squadron, simply because the ranges are different. So, if we allocate CCAs to an F-35 squadron, there's probably going to be the same ranges, physics, missiles, fuel considerations, all that kind of stuff. So we'd find ourselves buying a fighter-sized unmanned aircraft for the same cost, as well as operational challenges that we get with that F-35. Same for NGAD or whatever else. But if you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and one of the problems you run into, it's like, again, we're trying to solve we have all the same tools for the problem. So we have that CCA is going to have to carry the same weapons that fighter-sized aircraft do. So the CCA can't be that much smaller unless you build an entire suite of, weapons and stuff for this specific platform. So I think there's a lot of problems, because then you're still kind of solving one tactical problem. And I think you were spot on when you said, like, people who are not operators, end users, people who are not the tacticians, don't understand how to solve these tactical problems. It's because it's not their problem set. Like, we go into like large force engagements to like practice this and work together and see and learn how to, utilize all the tools that are available to you to, take down some adversary. And that is a skill set that is extremely important to it, but it's not probably the skill set that's going to help you come up with the future technology, because that's just, it's almost like you understand that just so you can then in the future, when new stuff does become available, you're like, this is how we should utilize it, I would assume.
Yeah. When new stuff comes about, you can either, like I said, do old mission with new technology, which is kind of the way the Air Force is talking about CCAs, or you can do new mission stuff with new technology. And that's where, when I put on a LinkedIn post, this is a hypothesis in search of feedback. I cannot prove it to you right now, but I'm willing to bet that if we built up a CCA or a UAS battle lab, cross-functional in nature, we could figure that stuff out. And you could build solutions a lot faster than you could with just figuring out how to OT&E an F-35/CCA squadron. You could do it for a lot cheaper because it's intended to be cheaper. And you could evolve the things you needed, the AI, the sensors, the logistics, the requirements. Requirements, for those of you who haven't been on the staff, is a 4-letter word. There's big R requirements, and that can be as simple or as complicated as a process as people start to talk about. One example I'll give is the Gripen, which is a Swedish fighter, kind of size of an F-16, but a lot cheaper to operate, and a lot more agile when you think about Agile Combat Employment, because it was designed to be agile. There were parts of that when they built the requirements for the Gripen, they said, I need to be able to swap this panel out in 5 seconds. And the engineer said, no, it takes 30 seconds because of all the things we got to do. And they said, no, we got to do it in 5 seconds. And then they had to build that piece to be swapped out in 5 seconds or whatever else. So I'm speaking kind of in general terms, but we haven't built our force for that kind of agility. And as you build a cross-functional battle lab, you can say, I need this drone to fit in a common launch tube. Or if it doesn't, I need it to fit like this in a Connex or whatever else. If you were to write all the requirements for that without experimenting rapidly, you're going to get it wrong. And it's not that someone else is going to get it wrong and I'm going to get it right. It's that if we've never done this before and we have brand new operational concepts and brand new technology, just the chance that we get it right is infinitesimally small. So let's acknowledge that we're going to have to learn something along the way. We as the Air Force, we as the manufacturers, et cetera, and we can come up with better ways of doing stuff. And you can come up with those trade-offs. I remember talking to one drone company and he said, what is your runway requirement? I said, I'm not going to give you a number because I don't understand the design trade-offs. We're used to an 8,000 foot runway or more in the Air Force. And the easy answer is a 0 foot runway. Just, vertical takeoff and landing or rockets or whatever else. That's easy. And that's easy for me as the warfighter with no understanding of design trade-offs to make. But if I gave you a number like 3,000 and you could give me a 3,300 foot runway requirement, tomorrow, but it takes you 3 more years to make those design trade-offs to get to 3,000 feet. I want to have that conversation as opposed to just setting a nice, pretty round number on a requirements document. So let's work with the manufacturers, the designers, to figure out what the design trade-offs are for stuff, because rarely is it you meet this line or you don't. It's, hey, I've got 10 requirements. I can meet 8 of them really easily, and it's going to take me a lot of money, a lot of time to get those last 2. Is that good enough? In our world, and especially for the speed at which DoD senior leadership says we need to go, 8 out of 10 is a grand slam. Like, let's do it. But the ways in which we operate the DoD procurement system, let's take forever to get that 10 out of 10, and let's make it look at like the things that we're used to looking at because we sit in our cubicles all day, which is an unmanned fighter-sized aircraft.
Well, and that's the way our acquisitions process just doesn't allow for that variability. It's like, hey, the paper is the guiding line and you can't deviate. And anybody who's on the operational side knows, like, you can't work in certainties. You have general, like, hey, we're going to do these things. We're going to pay a lot of attention and a lot of effort on safety and stuff. But outside of that, like, sometimes you're just going to have to explore the space and see what works and doesn't.
And that's where the Air Force really requires some structural change as well. In my experience in the Agile Battle Lab, the acquirers were well separated from the warfighters, were well separated from us doing, I would call it a new version of developmental and operational test. But we didn't just focus on the platform, the F-16 OT squadron or the F-22 DT squadron or flight or whatever else out at Edwards. We were focused on the holistic warfight. And if you had the acquirers alongside whether it's a warfighter or the testers or whatever else, and I'm sure I'm probably offending somebody in AFMC unintentionally, and there's good people out there doing good stuff, but there's also people that are, not familiar with technology and they say, I don't concur with this because that's how, we've never done it this way. And we don't acquire stuff that way. And we write a requirement based on what the acquirer thinks the warfighter needs instead of the acquirer, being hot, hungry, and sweaty out in the field alongside the tech sergeant who's supposed to be operating that equipment. And I've gone out to Hill and I've seen the challenges of the agility in the F-35. And, I know what the Dash 60 beta looks like to get the F-15 started. And just like the F-15, those Dash 60s are in museums as well. And there's better ways of acquiring support equipment and whatever else. So I think one of the best things the Air Force can do for itself is to reorganize itself to put some of those acquirers on the front lines smartly so that we are writing smart requirement documents when we have the requirements figured out. And until then, we're working with the developers to understand the design, trade-offs. Because when you work with some of these companies, like the Air Force wants this, and 90% of industry wants that. And you figure out that the differences are so small, but we think what we have is so special. to an extent, we can say, hey, yeah, make those tweaks for the Air Force only version of that. But if we think we're going to utilize commercial off-the-shelf equipment, let's acknowledge that one additional requirement it doesn't meet is not the end of the world.
Well, and that's one of the things that I think I like the kind of the spreadsheet or the PowerPoint slide that you kind of created of the different platforms and the different utilities of them, because I feel like every time we have a new problem, it has to be, we try to come up with some exquisite technology to fix the problem. And, you know, we complain about this, like we drop $50,000 bombs on stolen vehicles in the desert, you know, and you're like, that's costing us way more money than it's costing us our adversary. And then we turn around and we say like, hey, we need to not be seen, you know, air to air, so we don't get shot. And we build these amazing, exquisite technologies, which are amazing. And like, obviously Bender flies like a 5th gen stealth fighter. But then our adversaries just build radar jammers, and those radar jammers make that person not seen. And you're like, I feel like we're taking the expensive route to solve the problem. And granted, there's problems in each one, you know, like one cost of, you know, maintaining and stuff like that goes up, but then also, you know, jammers aren't perfect either. So there's pluses and minuses on each side, but using the stuff we have and then making it more versatile and making more utility out of the stuff that we currently have while we're coming up with just a completely different solution. Because anybody who has built a tactical plan and said like, here's your problem set, here's your tools you have, solve it. Every time that there are adversary tools that have multiple functions, it's like an exponential increase in the problem set. When like one SAM can launch different types of missiles, or if different platforms can carry different things, you're like, oh, now I can't just come up with one solution for this problem.
And sometimes the counter to a weapon or to an offensive equipment is more expensive than the other. You know, a Patriot will always be more expensive than the ballistic missile it's intended to shoot down. Like, that's just the nature of the game. So one of the challenges I think the Air Force suffers from in terms of thinking about the problem set is that the parts of our operational concepts from the 70s and 80s that were right was we were very offensively minded. The A-10, the F-15C, the, you know, SEAD, we're going to take the fight to the enemy. We're going to defend forward. And that has evolved in the F-35 and the F-22, and who knows what the NGAD's going to do and whatever else, and the B-21 definitely, that takes the fight forward. But the ways in which we can take the fight forward differ very much today. You know, throwing out low-cost jammers, throwing out precision warheads that might cost, you know, 10 grand to fly 500 miles, but you still got to defeat it with, you know, maybe a Patriot or the HQ-9 or an SA-17 missile. Like, that's the next way of taking the fight to the enemy. If we focus only on defending our giant airfields, if we only focus on defending our, you know, expensive manned assets, we're strategically picking the wrong side of that cost curve. So we should be smart about how we take the fight to the enemy. And I'm not saying we don't need fighters or bombers anymore, like, you know, far from it. I'm saying that should not be the only way in which we take the fight to the enemy. That should not be the only way in which we deter an enemy. We should, you know, darken the skies with kinetic and non-kinetic weapons that makes someone say, I can't defend my airspace. I cannot own the airspace I want to over Taiwan because it just gets really ugly. And if we can do that, we can get a little further down the calendar without going to war, is my concern.
And you look at that, like there's so much. It's not just sending planes, ships, weapons to fight other planes, ships, and weapons. It's countries, you know, in some cases, going to war. So there's an economic cost, there's a lives cost, there's an equipment cost, there's all these things. So looking at it as a single issue is just, it's just not tactically sound, because you have to understand, like, like you said, every time they're shooting $1 million missiles or multi-million-dollar missiles to shoot down multi-$1,000 toy. It's like, that is a complete win. Bender, what do you got? You've been too quiet.
Too quiet. No, I'm thinking about everything you guys are saying. I'm slower thinker than the rest of you. So
I just talk too much.
Yeah. No, I think. Well, I mean, I just kind of wonder about who really has the initiative right now, and China does, right, as far as development. So they're coming out with a new missile. It seems like every 6 months to a year that is better than the last one, and presents a lot of issues even for our best technology. But I think we're starting to turn a little bit. So there's some hope. Like, I think the ACE concept is, it's not perfect and it's really difficult, and we haven't solved all of the problems that come with that. But it does, like Vader was saying, it complicates the enemy's problem a lot more. Like, the things that we can bring to the fight, all the stuff that they have to target and worry about, that's good. So at least I think we're at least trying to kind of send some problems their way. Whereas I feel like in the last 20 years, it's just been problems coming our way. Like, I'm fighting with the same missile I fought with when I first started flying, Vipers, and they're 6 missiles more advanced than they were back in those days or whatever. So yeah. And the ABL, so at Hill, we after we talked to you the first time, we had the ABL come out to Hill to give us some briefs in our reserve wing or whatever. And it was awesome just to see all the little projects that they are working on. And it's the really cool thing about it is it really is coming from the warfighter. There's a lot of bull crap that is produced by Air Force Public Affairs and by the leadership of the Air Force or whatever, we're going to be innovative and blah, 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 blah. But no kidding, the ABL actually is doing cool stuff where they're, they're little stones that can, you probably know this already, but they're sick. But security forces, we need to protect a perimeter, but we only have, there's only 4 of us. So how are we going to protect an airfield? Okay, well, there's these little rocks that will, they can be IR sensors, or they can be I don't know, they can sense movement or whatever. And so they just scatter these rocks around a perimeter, and it'll set off an alarm. And then they just go send a drone over there to see what's going on. Is it an animal or is it human? And I'm well, that's pretty rad, and that's not, I don't think big Air Force was we got to solve this problem. It's just this.
You can't write a requirement for that because you don't know what is in the art of the possible. Bender, you touched on a few things about, us and China. We built a force to defeat the Soviets, and that is largely the force that we have on the field today. We won in Desert Storm. We said, that's the answer. And the guys in 1992 were not wrong. But then China looked at that and said, we have to defeat that force. So China built a force to defeat us, not defeat the Soviets. So they have, the PLA rocket force is a service, just like we have the Army, the Air Force, the Space Force. They have a rocket force. So they get funding and they build out new missiles and all that kind of stuff. So that's why they're going fast. We have not built and fielded a force to defeat the PLA. And that's a lot of the change going on in the services. That's why the Marines are, getting rid of tanks and bringing in, Tomahawks. In terms of, let me tell you a story about the intricacies of all that stuff. So you said, hey, we've only got 4 guys to defend the perimeter. We're saying, let's use rocks. Well, few things. One, who is in charge of defending the fence line from long-range missile attacks? It's not the security forces. It's not pilots. It's not intel. It's nobody. We haven't organized, trained, and equipped for the fight we're going up against. Period. And then when you start to feel those changes, everything is taking far longer than it should. So, we played with robot dogs back in 2019 and 2020, gained a lot of notoriety, and others have kind of taken that baton. So there's a wing out there that their security forces bought some robot dogs to augment their perimeter security stuff. And then when they deployed to an ACE exercise, and I'm dating myself a year ago, so hopefully we've fixed this to an extent, at least in this wing, maybe not others. The security forces guys that had their shipping containers that they could take, their stuff was completely maxed out. So they did not have room for the robot dogs to augment the perimeter security teams. Unmanned, low cost, doesn't eat, needs a little bit of power, but they couldn't bring them, so they left it at home. Similarly, you had a fighter squadron who had excess space. So they essentially bought a bunch of packing peanuts to throw into their ISU 90s to just fill the space up. So even when you deploy, yeah.
I think Vader and I know what's actually in that ISU 90.
Yeah.
So I've got pictures.
It's also not anything useful. That's true.
So we haven't evolved the entire unit construct of the squadron, the wing, the mission set to where when security forces has all their stuff, plus they need some more now because of the new requirements, we haven't figured out how to merge, just the shipping of those things.
But it's funny, like
I've got solutions, non-material and material. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is like we as a force have not yet said, hey, we're going to sit around a table and we're going to figure this out.
Well, that's the comical thing. Like the logistics squadron is a base level squadron that is planning all of the logistics. So if there's one belly button that would be like, hey, look at all this extra room in these containers and look at these guys. Like the fact that all of our funding gets slowly pulled from the squadron to the group to the wing and then like divvied out to whoever needs it. But the fact we don't do that with our logistics and other things is it's unfortunate.
Yeah,
maybe
maybe
it's supposed to happen.
The silos of excellence in the Air Force are as strong as ever. Loggies don't talk to pilots, and pilots don't talk to loggies, and then we talk about how we've got a logistics problem. And it's not an Air Force problem. I remember seeing the same problems at Indo-PACOM, where I, as an Air Force officer, was telling the Army 3-star that we're not putting logistics stuff into our budget requests. So that budget request got paused while we, updated our paperwork type of thing. Like we can't talk about a logistics problem if we're not asking to solve the logistics problem. Far too many wings. I've seen loggies whose job consists of taking the order from the customer to the engineer, to quote, Office Space.
People person.
And they're not integrated in the plan. And it's not that individual loggie's problem because I've seen it across multiple wings. We haven't integrated the force. And when you take some of those concerns to certain, leaders in the logistics world, they don't care. And when you take it to other people, they care, but they can't do anything about it. And when you think about what a lot of, not all, because there's some amazing commanders out there that are, throwing the rule book out the window. But then there's some commanders who are held accountable to the flying hour program and, how much their pilots are flying and that kind of stuff. And they're not allocating time to integrating the logistics piece and making those, let's call it the design trade-offs, once again, to be agile with their unit. I don't expect, the F-15 or the F-35 unit to take 10% of what they should and be awesome. Like the force wasn't built for that. Refrigerator Perry cannot be a prima ballerina. He wasn't built for that. But Refrigerator Perry, if needed, can go on a diet and, learn a few moves type of thing. And that's what we're asking our legacy units to do. And I say legacy, we're all legacy now because we haven't built those new things, whether it be with CCAs or, UAS platforms / munitions. But until we do that, we've got to redesign what we can and then figure out where we're taking risk, because you can't do this without risk. And I used to hit on that at every opportunity I could with colonels and above, whether it's rooms full of them or just one-on-one, is what you're doing is not riskless. So let's just talk about it honestly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard or I've seen over the years, but I've heard more recently, is that we have exercises, all of our MIC-T for everybody. I don't think I've ever used MIC-T. I was supposed to, and then I just kept on living my life, and then I just left. So sorry, Bender, you were probably my boss at that time. But either way, we have all of our metrics, and exactly like you said, they're to fight Russia, they're to fight a previous war. So the way we do exercises right now are like CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, whatever, nuclear, something like we train to like it's 1992 or whatever, like put your gas mask on, get ready to get cammed, and now we've got our decam lines, and it's like, is that the metric that's going to train us for tomorrow's fight? Like, I don't think so. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm unaware. But the reality is I just feel like we just take old metrics because they're already on the shelf. We just brush the dust off, and then we just utilize them because it's like, well, we don't have any other metrics built, so we're just going to keep doing this.
Yeah, that's a great example of we do things though because we've always done them that way. We are concerned probably about North Korea and maybe Russia using nukes and chem gear, but if a country doesn't need to use CBRN weapons, it will not use CBRN weapons. It will win the war conventionally. So when it comes to exercises these days, we're used to everyone getting, their vote. If you're a CBRN guy, we need the CBRN, tag. So in the ABL, we built exercises that would just throw those pieces out the window. We didn't build them a lot. We didn't build a lot of exercises. We weren't doing this quarterly, but we were very specific about the things we were testing, evaluating, and training to. And we were taking risk by not doing those other things. When I was worried about the intel threat or the long-range missile threat, I wasn't concerned about suicide bombers coming through the fence. We just didn't build an exercise around that. We didn't bring those people. We didn't pay for it. We didn't build it in the scenario. I'm not saying you never should ever again, but on the 1 to N list of importance, it was closer to N than it was closer to 1. And if we're going to test out new ways of winning the war, new ways of owning the air domain, new ways of agility, risk, all that kind of stuff, the first exercise you should do should not be with CBRN. It should be, can we launch these things? Can we talk to them? Do they go as far as we think they can? Do we know how to deconflict airspace? Or do we not care about deconflicting airspace? And do we know that, in a training exercise, we are going to deconflict airspace, but, if it's night one of the war, I'm going to descend outside of my, altitude block with no SA and I'll be happy about it if I need to, because that's how I survive. And I take that risk of just not knowing who's above or below me type of thing. But we have not prioritized the important things. One thing we did in the Agile Battle Lab to prioritize those things is start to add adversaries for ACE to exercises. So you weren't evaluating against the MICT checklist or the training, being that the CBRN guy put out there, but it was you're fighting the adversary. And if the adversary didn't kill you, then you win. If the adversary killed you, then we learn from that kill. And none of this is to insult the CBRN career field or whatever else, but as we're evolving the way in which we fight, you can't be concerned about everything all at once, because if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So you got to start at priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, and work your way down the list. And if CBRN's priority 10, awesome, but I'm not going to worry about it if priorities 1, 2, 3 through 7 have all been ignored, type of thing.
I went to pilot training with this girl, when you said that, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, and she would highlight every line of every page in her book, like in different highlighter. And I was like, is because everything's a priority. Like, so there you go. She showed us. But yeah, I think that's kind of my question is like, if we're truly executing ACE, if we're truly doing what I envision ACE to be, 10, maybe 30% of the actual base is going to have hands-on participation, because most people are going to be left behind because people are just going to get like scattered around the wherever, and it's going to be a logistical nightmare. But the reality is most people probably don't play where CBRN or our traditional exercises, everybody has their hands on it. Am I thinking about that incorrectly, or do you think there is some of that, like we need to make sure everybody gets a chance to be part of the exercise?
Yes and no. In our old way of doing things, yes. And our new way of doing things, no. So when I deployed to the DEED, I went to the finance office, and they were the finance office at the DEED as opposed to the finance office at Dias Air Force Base or whatever else. They did their same job forward as they did at home. So in that case, yes, I don't care about finance when I'm dodging, missile attacks type of thing. So don't bring them on the first chalk of manpower. The first chalk should be very multi-capable, cross-functional, whatever words you want to use, with the tactics, techniques, procedures, technology, training, and policy to enable that. But when Chalk 2 comes through with that finance airman should be able to do something other than finance. Or, and this is ideal, they no longer train to be that sit in the office, 9 to 3 with training from, noon to 2 type of thing, finance that we're used to, and they should be doing something more war related. I'll give you a great example. Been to exercises where communications is a problem, and this I'm dating myself for a few years, and we've made advances since then. But where the comm leadership says, I don't have time to practice on this, I've got to keep Nipper up and running on my base, and I got to do Nipper email trouble tickets. And I said, well, tell the wing commander you're not going to do them, because based on the wing commander stated priorities, ACE is more important than Tuesdays operations. So take risk on a Tuesday to train your people to do ACE so that they can do their combat mission. And if that means there's a delay in trouble tickets or whatever else, like it's accepted and it is advertised as the new priorities for the wing writ large, not just the comm person. Because we all respond to incentives, and if your boss says do X before Y, you do X before Y. But if he says Y is more important, then you say, I'm not going to do X until I've got Y figured out. And then you just take some risk with X. And the commander should say, yeah, that is in line with my guidance. Part of the definition for ACE is executed within threat timelines. And when you think about the old ways in which we deployed, I remember showing up to the processing line like 6 hours before I got on a commercial jet. I wasn't even flying a combat jet over. I wasn't packing anything into a C-17. I was just supposed to show up like 6 hours early to sit in a waiting room before I got on Delta Airlines to go to the Middle East. Now let's talk about threat timelines. Is that the way in which we're going to operate and survive? No.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff we got to change when it comes to ACE. And to a certain extent, we're doing what we can. And I commend the commanders that are doing what they can with what they have to go out and execute ACE. But we can also crank that dial up, crank it up to 11, and actually get at the needs for ACE. Like Bender, you mentioned some of the stuff that the ABO brought out and some of the stuff that we've actually got funding for, which is well outside of the job jar of the Agile Battle Lab, but because no one else is doing it, they did it. And it wasn't just having a burger burn at the deployed location. It was building real solutions that are ugly and not fun to execute under, but it's how you continue to survive and generate combat power. And I'm not going to go into some of those details of the equipment, the training, whatever else. But like you said, they were doing it. They weren't just talking about it. And there's a lot of people that just talk about, we will survive or we will be agile, with all the hand waves and white cards that bring that about. But the real answer is we got to figure this stuff out. And if we think we're going to bring mass to the fight, it can't just be about putting some lipstick on the pig of our force design from the 1970s. We actually have to come up with a better force design based on the capabilities of the technology and the budget and the way in which we do things. And we've got to build new units for that. We increased the size of air support operations squadrons, for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. We are not changing our units for the future fight for China. That's wrong.
Well, and that's my question is like, we have all these rules and regulations of like who can touch what airplanes, and this person's the only person qualified to sign off the fact that this missile was loaded correctly, and all of those, and somewhere we're going to just like break this point, we're going to like crack the glass, and now it's like, cool, calm, you now refuel airplanes. Hey, this person, I land at some base and it's only F-16 maintainers. And it's like, I need fuel and weapons. Like, can you guys do that? Like, my understanding, my logic would be like, we have to. But are we just never going to train to it because we're not going to accept that responsibility until it's just too late? And then it's like, hey, we're just going to make it happen and probably even accept even more risk?
So there's good people trying to figure this out. I've been a lot of the staff knife fights, And the way I've seen this go down is you have a whole lot of career functional managers and MAGCOM functional managers that defend their rice bowl. You don't want an unqualified weapons person putting weapons on your jet, do you? Imagine what could go wrong. Oh, no, I don't. Well, hold on. How long is your 18-year-old's tech school to become qualified to put a weapon on a jet? Is it 3 years long or is it a few months long? Oh, okay. How many times does that crew chief watch that weapons dude put that missile on that jet? You think that crew chief who's been around planes for 7 years might have an idea of how to do it? Yeah. I am not a qualified air traffic control person. But as a T6 FAPE, I controlled a T6 pattern with 12 aircraft doing a whole bunch of different stuff. And I had I think I had some training logs, where I filled up, pieces of paper. I did so many traffic movements and blah, blah, blah. I don't need an ATC person if I'm sitting in the tower, for a low volume airfield type of thing. The problem is we are approaching multi-capable airmen and its evolution from a point of view of what is my career field comfortable with, as opposed to what is necessary to get the job done and how do I incentivize that. If I were a wing commander today, and I'm not, I'm a Mr. Chitwood. Yeah. If I were a wing commander today, I would say there will be...
Sorry, retired.
Thanks. There will be no more awards given out that don't have multi-capable airmen training on it. You will either include in your awards package that you achieved a new skill and you're qualified in it, a 3-level skill. I learned how to chalk a jet. I learned how to refuel a jet. I learned how to operate the Prick 117 Gulf radio. Or you will put in your awards package that you train someone how to do it. I train someone how to do my job so that when I die, they can do it. Or when we are now operating from 3 locations instead of 1, and I can only be at one of those locations, I have now trained a person how to operate at operating location Bravo and operating location Charlie, and I am at operating location Alpha, standing by to run my airfield and also answer questions from operating locations Bravo and Charlie, because they're not going to be experts that I am. And if you said that you can't win an award unless you have qualified on something new or you've qualified someone new on this, you're going to see a drop in, whatever community, whatever stuff people do that I remember having to do for quarterly and annual awards. And you're going to see a whole lot of finance guys and gals get smart on setting up tents and chow hall stuff. And, you'll see doctors learning about food safety instead of talking about COVID. And you'll see age maintainers learning how to turn a jet, because you have maintainers in your units. You don't know this. You have maintainers in your units that they're qualified to touch the support equipment in your unit, but they're not qualified to use that equipment on the jet. Only the aircraft maintainer can use that equipment on that jet. And if that is a Dash 60 for you, Vader, that provides essentially air to your jet, the CE person in your unit who knows air conditioning for tents is not allowed to touch that support equipment that does air conditioning for a jet, and that the guy that does the air conditioning for jets isn't allowed to touch the air conditioner for your tent. And nor have we built a requirement that says the air conditioner for a tent is good enough to be the air conditioner for a jet. Yeah. Or the power plug going to the jet is also the power plug that goes to your tent or your, whatever else. So across the board, we are not doing what could be done to make us a much more agile, lethal, and resilient force.
Well, and that's
because we're approaching it from the perspective of what am I comfortable with, as opposed to hold my beer, show me what you got. And the first wing commander that can do it, with a third of their manpower and can do it for, call it, 5 straight days, he gets a star immediately, combat promotion.
Well, and I think, honestly, there's probably a lot of people in the military who would be totally excited to just get the opportunity to go learn something new, to get out of their office and, maybe tents, or maybe it's just go learn the TCCC, the ASBC, or no, what was it? Whatever it was, the Self-Aid Buddy Care, SBC.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what is it?
SABC.
SABC. Yeah. Too many acronyms.
SABC.
We'll get there.
TCCC now. But hey, the comm guy becomes the like a TCCC, a combat care person, or stuff like that. There could be so much, because I think a lot of people want to do it. I mean, I argued back in the day that like any TDY, any school, any training that anybody wants to go to, that their squadron or wing or whatever can fund, let them go. Like if I want to go to advanced hand-to-hand combat or advanced marksman school, or if somebody wants to go to like survival, let them go. If there's spots and there's money, like let's make people, just make a benefit of being in the military and give them the chance to participate in stuff that on the average day they don't get to.
And you can train the trainer. You don't have to go TDY to a tech school to become qualified on something. The one Charlie Oscar in your squadron that sits at the front desk doing your flying currencies, you can send them down on a Tuesday to the comm squadron and have them learn how to use a radio, how to set it up, how to encrypt it, how to sign for the encryption, how to handle the encryption, all that kind of stuff. So that when you do deploy to those 3 operating locations, you don't need to bring 3 times the comm people. You've got your one Charlie Oscar who knows how to use a Prick 117 Golf to communicate to an airborne jet, as well as, TACSAT, reaching over the horizon to whoever else.
Can we make them a top 3 also? That'd be sweet.
What does top 3 do?
Like,
look at flying currencies, look at the, your ORM card, like.
Too easy.
Now, yeah, what is the role of a top 3 at a contingency location? Is it just the pilot? Do I need a squadron commander just running the squadron? Like at a certain point in time, our commanders have to be taught the operational level of warfare, and then all those things that we think we needed. You've got a SOF, and you've got a top 3, and you've got your ATC guys, and you got your one Charlies. Like, do I need all that? Have we built a UTC for that? No, we've just copied right now the UTCs that we used to have. So when I deployed to the deed, I sat SOF. I couldn't control traffic because, once again, I'm not a qualified air traffic controller. But if you line jets up on an ILS, like, I got it.
Yeah. Bender, what do you got?
Yeah, I think, in the reserves, it's kind of interesting too, because a lot of these guys have normal jobs, right? And then they just come in 1 weekend a month or whatever. So you got diesel mechanics who are one Charlie.
Bingo.
Or whatever. Like those guys are ready to do, that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit of push, which is kind of cool. Like our wing commander's like, all right, let's get a database. Like what are the skills? Like some of them are cops in real life, but they're firefighters in the Air Force, or they're nurses or whatever in real life, but they come in and they do command posts. Anyway, so there's a lot of that, and people have different hobbies that do qualify them.
And the answer looks different in the Guard and the Reserves, but we need to let's qualify those people. Let's get them on a letter of X's that say, you are now, I know you're a cop in our unit, but you're an electrical engineer, you're an electrician in your real job. Like I'll slap a CE badge on you, pass the test, and because here's what happens when that CE guy dies or gets malaria or whatever else. You can't just wait for the next CE guy to come on the rotator from a sister guard unit or whatever else. But if you got a guy who knows how to plug stuff in, and I don't know whatever electricians do. Clearly, I'm not qualified to be an electrician.
You're the first.
You get the idea. And it might even be like turning a jet. I'm going to say something really crazy. I don't think we need to go to this detail right now, but if a jet lands and that jet needs to be launched again, but you as a pilot have been awake for 24 hours on Dexedrine, it might not be a good idea to quick turn you to another combat sortie. But there might be someone else at that location that knows how to fly a jet. He's not going to fly to combat, but he might just fly it back to a different location where there are more pilots to make the next push or something along those lines. That gets really weird, and I'm not advocating for that as on the 1 to N list. That's at N, for MCA type stuff. But there's so many other things. Like we have set up and run exercises where the C2 location is a pilot, an intel dude, or is a pilot, a TAC P, and I think the intel guy was just kind of there. It takes 2.5 minutes to set up, 2.5 minutes to tear down, and I don't need all these extra things because I've got the software to kind of build SA. And as pilots and TAC Ps, like they've got a lot of SA, they can ingest all that information and they can make decisions on the fly. So they don't need like a whole staff to run a squadron or a group or whatever else. So there's things, that are lower hanging fruit, more productive than pilots being multi-capable in their jets. But in the Marines, pilots know how to refuel their jets. Bender, do you know how to refuel your jet?
Actually, I had to refuel my jet when we dropped into Sicily on an AOS back home, because the Italian guys were like, "We can't touch your airplane," or whatever. So they like brought the fuel hose, but I'm like, "Oh crap! Like, where does this thing go?" So it took a little while.
And somehow you did it. You didn't blow up. I made
it happen. And also, this is a big shout out to myself. Vader, you might have been here when we dropped into Iwakuni. And the JFIS, we had a jet with a JFIS leak, the jet fuel starter. Is that what it is?
Yep.
Anyway, so we kept having we needed to pump up the JFIS, but there was no JFIS. Like, there's a special tool that they use to pump the thing. Yeah. So we took the gear pins, and we were like using the gear pin to like pump this bottle, which was almost impossible. And we were in poopy suits. And anyway, so we pumped it with the gear pins, and then we'd run and jump in the jet before it leaked too much to not start. Anyway, it took 3 tries to finally get the thing pumped up or whatever. And the Japanese were just sitting there like, "What is going on? You guys look like retards." But it worked, and we got the jet started and flew it home or whatever. So
there's a lot of stories about that. Like, multi-capable airman is far more capable as a concept than we let on in the Air Force, and that we have tried to, max perform. You're not the first pilot to turn their jet, but if you've never done it, you need to call back home. And we can build the tech, the tactics, the training, all that kind of stuff to dial that risk up and down based on what is needed. And it's not just multi-capable airmen, it's tactics. It's about, do you need an 8,000-foot runway? Do you need a wire to land at? No, you don't. We're just used to like having zero risk, therefore I need a wire everywhere I go.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of places you can go that don't have wires, but we don't train to that because what would happen if? And we don't think about, well, if we're worried about that, how do we mitigate that? Can we do a brake check before we start up and before we launch? There's a lot of stuff out there. And as we think through the brand new technology we're going to field, let's not just say that CCAs are the answer before we have any idea how to integrate it, before we have any idea what the limitations and the pros are, because I can guarantee you the AI to run those is but one of the many pass or fail pieces of technology to fight the war. And I don't mean fly at Edwards, I mean fight the war.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I think that's a perfect end note, and I got to get running. But yeah, there's so much. And Adam, thank you for being back on here. Congrats on the retirement, and we'll have to have you back on in a couple months just to hear what you're up to then.
Sounds great.
Sweet. Well, remember, like, share, subscribe, and follow us on LinkedIn, and follow Adam Chitwood. His LinkedIn will be on the show notes if you want to go see more stuff he's posting, and follow us Instagram as well for videos of all this stuff. And on YouTube, you can watch all 3 of us, all our smiling faces while we chat about all the inefficiencies that we experience. But Bender, any parting shots before we go?
No, just thanks again for coming out and joining us, and you did a good job with the ABL. So when I got to experience what they were kind of putting out, it was impressive. It was good stuff. So nice work.
They're great people. Thanks.
Yeah, if you're military and you want to actually do some real exercises and step your game up, reach out to the ABL because they're doing some good work. All right, thanks again. See ya.
Take care, gents.